Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something so grim, so strange, that you probably won't survive this. Well, at least not awake. Because by the time we're done wandering through the shadows of history, you'll either be fascinated, terrified, or fast asleep. Picture this: flickering candlelight in a damp stone room, the sound of distant bells tolling through a foggy night, and you, sitting right here with me, leaning closer to the fire. The story that drifts toward us isn't a fairy tale, isn't a legend, but a wave of dread that once rolled across the entire known world. The Black Death. And first, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You know how this works. A little ritual we share before the spooky parts begin. And hey, you probably won't survive the Middle Ages anyway, so what's the harm? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love knowing if someone is curled up in London at midnight or stretched out in Mumbai while the fans hum at 3 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander into the late 1340s, and the world is not the same as ours. There's no warning signs, no headlines on glowing screens. Instead, there are whispers, rumors from the east. Traders, arriving in dusty caravans, tell stories of entire towns emptying out. Ships that dock reek of silence, with sailors feverish or already stiff and cold. You feel it, the tension under the ordinary rhythms of life, as though something unseen is traveling along with every wagon wheel, every rat darting across the straw, every flea that clings unnoticed. Scholars still argue whether the Black Death began in the dry steppes of Central Asia, or whether it had flickered to life earlier, in places no chronicler bothered to write down. But you don't care where it started. You only feel the shift in the air, the kind of heavy hush that comes before a storm that at first people ignore it. That's what humans do best, right? You've seen it, even now. Warnings brushed aside because routine feels safer than panic. But soon, the fear grows harder to ignore. Whispers sharpen into shouts. Strange deaths multiply, and the roads that once felt safe now seem haunted by invisible predators. You wander closer, through the candlelit market stalls, and you notice people pulling back, not from prices or gossip, but from each other. A cough now means suspicion. A pale face now sparks a murmur. And in that creeping dread, you realize this is not a single tragedy. This is a tide rolling toward Europe, slow but unstoppable. By now, your eyelids may already feel heavy, but don't close them yet, because the first true chapter of the Black Death hasn't even begun. It waits just across the sea, where ships carry more than spice and silk. Ships carry doom. You wander further, and the whispers are louder now. They float along the docks, coil around tavern benches, and follow you through narrow alleyways. Everywhere you turn, rumors of plague feel heavier than the smoke rising from chimneys. Sailors tell stories of whole harbors abandoned, of cities where bells ring endlessly because no one survives long enough to stop them. The tales come from the east, Kaffa, a port on the Black Sea, besieged by Mongol armies who, in one of the earliest cases of biological warfare, are said to have catapulted plague-ridden corpses over the walls. Whether that's true or just fear magnified into myth, you can't really tell, but the whispers keep circling, and each version grows darker. You step onto damp cobblestones, and the mood shifts. Town criers mutter about pestilence, priests raise their voices in sermons of warning, and ordinary people clutch rosary beads a little tighter. You glance at market stalls, sacks of grain, dried fish, a few apples, and yet, no matter how mundane the scene, everything feels fragile, as though one breath of poisoned air could end it. The odd detail sticks in your mind. Cats and dogs are being blamed too. Some towns deciding they spread the sickness. You notice fewer animals around. The fear has already claimed them. Later scholars will point out how strange this choice was, because the real culprits, fleas on rats, were left unchecked. But in the moment, people don't know. They're just grabbing onto any explanation that lets them feel slightly less powerless. A scholarly debate will echo through centuries. Did the plague travel primarily by ship, rats along trade routes? Or did humans themselves carry it faster than vermin ever could? You don't settle the question here. You just feel the tension of an age teetering on collapse, caught between rumor and reality. The night deepens. A tavern door creaks open. Inside, men argue whether God's wrath or foreign merchants are to blame. One slams his mug on the table and swears he saw a black swell on his neighbor's neck. You leave quickly, the air suddenly tasting thicker, as if those whispered stories have already found a way into your lungs. You step back into the streets, and the rhythm of the city feels broken. Usually, you'd hear laughter, bargaining, and the shuffle of carts loaded with goods. But tonight there's only the hollow creak of wagon wheels carrying more silence than cargo. The plague hasn't yet consumed everything here, but you can sense it creeping closer, like a shadow lengthening with each passing hour. Merchants glance nervously over their shoulders as if every cough might be the beginning of something fatal. A baker sprinkles flour with shaking hands, muttering that grain from the east is cursed. You catch glimpses of letters being exchanged in hurried secrecy, trade guilds, sending warnings that caravans bring not only spices and silk, but invisible death. One historical fact pushes through the haze. By the late 1340s, entire trade routes from Asia to Europe had become conduits of contagion. What once brought wealth and exotic wonders now seemed poisoned. The oddest scene unfolds at a fountain. A group of women draw water, their faces pale with gossip. One insists the disease is spread by miasma, bad air rising from marshes. Another swears it clings to foreigners' clothes. Someone else mentions that a comet had passed in the sky, a blazing omen of doom. You watch them debate, their buckets trembling as though water itself might betray them. And yet scholars still argue whether these explanations were sincere attempts to understand or just desperate superstition dressed as reason. What you do know is that fear multiplies faster than fleas. You keep walking and find yourself near the church. Candles glow against stone walls, flickering as wind pushes through cracks. Inside, prayers roll endlessly. Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. Monks chant, their voices raw, while villagers press their foreheads to wooden pews. The air smells of incense and wax, heavy, suffocating. A child sneezes in the corner, and everyone flinches. The sound hangs like a curse. Stepping back into the night, you notice a chilling silence beyond the chants. Streets that should be bursting with tavern songs and dice games are subdued, as though the whole town is waiting for a storm they can't escape. You take a breath, but it doesn't ease your chest. The wind carries more whispers. Ships have docked nearby, and sailors are already coughing. You imagine the unseen tide has turned, and you're standing on the shore of catastrophe. You move toward the harbor, and the night air feels damp with salt and something fouler beneath it. The docks are restless. Ropes creak, waves slap against hulls, and sailors shuffle cargo with expressions carved in unease. Normally, ports are noisy theaters of life, shouting merchants, hammering carpenters, children running along planks. Tonight, everything is subdued. muffled as though the sea itself is holding its breath. You edge closer to a moored galley. Lanterns swing above, painting shadows that wobble across barrels of grain and baskets of dried fish. The sailors don't look up, and you realize why. They're whispering about rats. You hear the scratching before you see them, tiny claws darting across timbers, black eyes glinting in the lantern light. The sailors step back, muttering curses. One spits over the edge, swearing the vermin are omens. Another swears he's seen them leap straight from one ship to another like tiny, furry messengers of doom. A historical fact slams into place here. Rats, carrying fleas infected with Yersinia pestis, became the infamous vessels of the plague. They hid in cargo, nibbled on grain, and sailed with armies. Entire continents were undone by the tiny teeth you see gnawing rope right before you. But the odd detail is almost absurd. Some sailors, believing cats were demonic, had killed them in droves across Europe just decades earlier. Without feline hunters, rats multiplied unchecked. So superstition didn't just fail to protect people, it handed victory to vermin. You picture the irony, and it almost feels like a cosmic joke. Except no one's laughing. Scholars still argue whether the true spread came from fleas, on rats, or directly from person to person, through droplets. A priest at the pier mutters, as though answering your thoughts. His voice trembles, caught between faith and helplessness. He blesses the cargo anyway, lifting his hand in the sign of the cross, as if holy water might stop what claws and blood already carry. The dockworkers begin unloading. You see bolts of fabric, shimmering silks, and jars sealed with wax. But you also notice a sailor coughing into his sleeve, trying to hide the blood-speckled sputter that follows. He leans against the railing, and others step away, silent but watching. The disease is already here. It's too late for prayers or charms. Behind you, taverns attempt false joy. Fiddles squeak through hurried tunes, and mugs clink half-heartedly. You step inside one. The air is heavy with ale and fear. A storyteller sits by the fire, spinning tales of cursed winds from Asia. He insists the Mongols brought not just war, but a curse carried on every breeze. His audience drinks deeply, but their eyes don't shine with wonder, they sink with dread. You slip back outside. The harbor looks smaller now. Its ships more like coffins than carriers. The lanterns sway in the cold wind, and the rats keep moving, tireless, unstoppable. You realize you've just witnessed the front line of the apocalypse. Not armies in armor, but vermin in shadows. You drift away from the harbor, but the image of those rats stays with you, scratching inside your mind like claws on wood. The streets are darker here, narrower, twisting like veins through the city's body. You move past shuttered houses where windows are bolted tight, and not even candlelight slips through the cracks. Families hide indoors, convinced that shutting out the night might also shut out the sickness. The sound of bells follows you, a low, steady toll, not for the hour but for the dead. You pause at a crossroads where a cart creaks into view. Wooden wheels wobble over uneven stones, and inside the cart lies a heap of bodies covered in coarse linen. The driver doesn't look at you. His eyes are blank, his face streaked with sweat and dust. He mutters the same words over and over, a prayer, or maybe a curse. The horses snort, restless, as though they too understand. They're pulling more than weight. They're dragging fear through the streets. A mainstream historical fact lands sharply here during the Black Death. Mass graves became the grim solution for cities overwhelmed with corpses. Churchyards filled so quickly that trenches were dug, lined with bodies, and covered hastily before the next load arrived. What you see in this card is only a fraction of the silent flood to come. But then there's the strange, almost grotesque detail you can't shake. You notice charms pinned to some of the shrouds, little pouches filled with herbs, garlic, or even crushed emerald dust. Families believe these would ward off the disease, protect the soul, or sweeten the air enough to confuse the plague's grip. It's tender and heartbreaking, and yet utterly futile. Scholars still argue whether people clung to such talismans out of genuine faith or out of desperate need for control when medicine, and clergy had no answers. Either way, the objects lie useless against cloth that barely hides the outline of wasted limbs. You follow the cart as it rattles toward the outskirts. The road opens onto a field, and you see lanterns bobbing in the distance. Men dig trenches under the moonlight, shovels biting into earth that doesn't want to yield. The pit yawns wide, waiting. The smell is sharp and bitter, carrying on the breeze, turning your stomach. You stand there for a while, watching as the bodies are lifted one by one and lowered into the ground. No names are spoken, no rites are read, just the thud of earth as shovels scrape it back over the pile. The bell in the distance keeps tolling, slow and steady. A grim heartbeat for a city collapsing under invisible weight. When you finally turn away, the silence behind you feels heavier than the bells, heavier than the dirt itself. The night has swallowed its dead, and tomorrow will demand more. You wander into a quieter quarter of the city, streets lined with shuttered homes and silent courtyards. The smell of smoke and herbs clings to the air, mingling with something sharper. Metallic, the scent of sickness itself. Children peek through cracks in doors, wide-eyed, clutching rag dolls and small bundles of bread, unsure whether the world outside is still safe. Their faces are pale, lips pressed tight, and you can see the tension in every tiny movement. A historical fact presses itself into your mind. By the height of the Black Death, some towns lost nearly half their population. Entire neighborhoods emptied overnight, leaving behind abandoned homes, unharvested gardens, and livestock wandering aimlessly. You step over a stray goat nibbling at weeds by a wall, and it pauses to stare at you, unbothered, as if it senses how fragile the human world has become. You notice an odd detail. In one doorway, a woman arranges bowls filled with vinegar and rose petals, believed to purify the air and ward off plague. Some towns even burned aromatic herbs in the streets, filling the smoky haze with strange scents. A desperate attempt to battle the invisible enemy. It's almost poetic, this tiny act of defiance against death itself. Scholars still argue whether these folk remedies actually had any impact or if they were purely symbolic gestures, offering comfort more than cure. You don't need their debate to feel the tension. You can see it etched on every face, hear it in every cautious footstep. A man carrying a wooden box crosses your path. He's a messenger of sorts, delivering letters and urgent notes from town to town. You glimpse the seal on one envelope, a black skull. The recipient will understand the meaning immediately. The plague is not just disease. It's a message that arrives with certainty, one that no door can block and no prayer can fully erase. As you move further down the cobbled streets, a bell tower chimes, announcing the hour. Yet the sound feels mournful rather than orderly. You realize it marks more than time. It marks absence. Families vanished, markets silent, and churches emptied. The air itself seems to weigh heavier now, pressing down, as if mourning the living along with the dead. In a small square, a group of villagers attempts a semblance of normal life. A boy hands bread to a girl, and they exchange a hesitant smile. For a fleeting moment, it's almost ordinary, almost like life before whispers of plague. Yet even this small gesture carries fragility. The shadow of what's to come hangs over them. You turn a corner and find a fountain dry, cracked stone catching the last light of dusk. The water once brought life. Now it reflects only the fading sky, the town's emptiness mirrored in its shallow basin. You linger, feeling the stillness settle deep into your chest, a quiet prelude to the chaos that the Black Death will bring. You wander into a narrow lane where suspicion clings to the walls like ivy. Whispers curl around corners, bouncing from one shuttered window to another. People glance at you with wary eyes, muttering about strangers, outsiders, and travelers. Any unfamiliar face could be a harbinger of plague, and the townsfolk treat it as such. A historical fact emerges from the tension. Scapegoating became common during the Black Death. Jews, foreigners, and wandering beggars were accused of poisoning wells or spreading disease intentionally. Entire communities faced violence and expulsion simply because fear demanded a target. You pass a small alley where a notice has been nailed to the wall, a crude warning etched in charcoal, telling outsiders to stay away. An odd detail catches your attention. A group of children is playing with wooden dolls, fashioning tiny graves and carts, unknowingly mimicking the real horrors around them. Their laughter is hollow, almost eerie, cutting through the oppressive silence. You realize even play has been touched by the shadow of death. Scholars still argue whether these acts of blame were purely fear-driven or if social tensions already present in medieval towns amplified them during plague outbreaks. Either way, the tension is palpable, and you feel it pressing against your skin like an invisible hand. A man approaches carrying a basket of herbs and spices. He mutters to himself, crossing the street to avoid anyone's gaze. His load smells of thyme, rosemary, and something acrid, a mix intended to mask disease or purify the air. You notice the careful steps he takes, avoiding contact, and the fear in his eyes mirrors your own unease. The lane opens onto a small courtyard where a priest is, preaching from the steps of a chapel. He waves his arms dramatically, calling for repentance, for penance, for mercy. Some villagers kneel with bowed heads, while others stand stiffly, whispering among themselves. The tension between hope and despair is tangible, a tightrope that the plague forces everyone to walk. As you move on, you pass a deserted bakery. Loaves are stacked in the window, untouched, while the baker's family has disappeared overnight. You can almost hear the soft shuffle of rats, skittering unseen, already taking over spaces left vacant by humans. The world feels hollow, haunted by fear and absence. A landscape where suspicion and dread have become as real as the disease itself. You step into the marketplace just as dawn breaks. Pale lights spilling over the cobblestones and casting long, trembling shadows. Normally bustling with merchants, traders, and townsfolk, the square now seems frozen. A stage set for silence. Stalls are half empty, their wares untouched. Sacks of grain leaning precariously, apples bruised from neglect. You feel the absence of human chatter, replaced by an uneasy hush that presses against your ears. A historical fact stands starkly here. Cities lost such a large proportion of their population that market activity plummeted. Trade slowed, and essential goods became scarce. You see this in the empty stalls and the slow, hesitant movements of those few willing to brave the square. An odd detail draws your eye. A rooster, abandoned in the corner of the market, crows repeatedly, as if trying to wake the town from its lethargy. Yet no one answers. Its feathers are ruffled, eyes wide, and you can't help but notice the eerie symbolism. Life persists, but vigilance has dulled. Scholars still argue whether the disruption of trade and daily life had long-term economic effects or if communities eventually rebounded quickly. In the moment, you can only witness the immediate fragility. A woman pushes a cart of herbs, mumbling protective charms under her breath, while children peek cautiously from behind walls. Their small hands clutch dolls or bread, gripping tokens of normalcy in a world suddenly stranger and more dangerous. A man sitting by the fountain scratches his beard, noting each cough that echoes down the empty lanes, tallying the invisible enemy. You move toward the fountain and notice that even water seems muted. The surface reflects the rising sun, pale and hesitant, and a few stray leaves drift across it, untouched by fingers or care. Nearby, pigeons coo softly, their presence a faint reminder that nature carries on even as humans falter. As the day stretches, more villagers dare to leave their homes, carrying baskets of food and whispered prayers. Their faces are tight with worry, hands trembling as they touch coin or bread. You sense the duality of life and fear, each step measured against an invisible countdown. The distant tolling of bells marks the passing hours, a relentless rhythm reminding everyone that time continues. Indifferent to panic or grief, you breathe in the morning air, sharp and bitter with smoke, and realize that even routine acts, buying bread, drawing water, have become laden with peril. You follow a narrow alley toward the city walls, where the morning mist clings to stone like a shroud. The wind carries a chill that bites at your ears and nose, mingling with the faint smell of smoke and decay. Along the walls, watchmen pace slowly, glancing down at the empty streets below, eyes heavy with exhaustion and dread. A historical fact presses itself forward. Many medieval cities erected watch posts and controlled gates during plague outbreaks, attempting to monitor movement and limit the spread of disease. But walls could not stop invisible enemies carried in the air, on rats, or by travelers who slipped through unnoticed. An odd, unsettling detail catches your attention. A merchant leans against the wall, carefully measuring each step with chalk marks drawn on the ground, believing the markings will ward off illness by creating safe zones of air. Others imitate him in hushed fascination, each gesture a fragile ritual of control. Scholars still argue whether these makeshift barriers and superstitious practices had any real effect or merely offered psychological comfort. Standing here, you feel their futility firsthand. Beyond the walls, a cart creaks under the weight of firewood, its driver hunched and coughing. The horses snort nervously, stamping on the stones, while a black cat darts between barrels, eyes glinting. The odd juxtaposition of life, superstition, and death creates a surreal rhythm you cannot ignore. A priest emerges from a side chapel, ringing a handbell as he sprinkles holy water along the walkway. Villagers bow or step aside, their faces tense, aware of the ritual's intent but uncertain of its power. Children peek from doorways, some clutching charms, others hiding, imagining the unseen horrors beyond the walls. You move to a small overlook and gaze at the outskirts of the city. Smoke curls from chimneys of homes still inhabited, while closer to the river, the abandoned cottages hint at families taken overnight. Rats scurry over rooftops and fences, fearless, carrying the same invisible burden as the whispers of the townsfolk. Time seems distorted here. Each step, each glance, carries weight. Every cough or rustle amplifies the tension, and you realize that the walls, designed to protect, feel more like a barrier against hope than the plague itself. You descend toward the riverbank, where mist clings to reeds and the water moves sluggishly, reflecting pale morning light. Fishermen stand silently along the edge, their nets empty or snagged, hands trembling as they lift lines that yield only weeds or debris. The air smells faintly of brine and decay, and you notice a thin layer of fog hovering above the river, softening the edges of the abandoned docks. A historical fact enters your awareness. During plague years, rivers and canals were often left deserted, once busy hubs of trade and travel turning eerily silent as people fled or died. The lifeblood of commerce slowed to a near halt, leaving only echoes and stillness. An odd detail draws your attention. One fisherman has hung garlic and dried herbs along his boat's railing, claiming the scents will protect him from sickness. You note the contrast, the practical work of casting nets, juxtaposed with ritualistic superstition, a human attempt to impose order on chaos. Scholars still argue whether such folk practices had any actual protective effect, or whether they merely offered a small comfort to those who faced a terrifying unknown. Standing here, you can almost feel the uncertainty in the air. Thick as the morning fog, a heron lands delicately near the water's edge, its reflection mirrored perfectly on the glassy surface. You watch it tilt its head, scanning for fish that are no longer plentiful. Nature continues, indifferent to human suffering, and the quiet grace of the bird is almost surreal. Against the backdrop of silent docks and empty nets, nearby, a cart with barrels of freshwater creaks across the cobblestones. Its driver coughs into his sleeve, casting furtive glances at passers-by. He is careful to keep his distance, aware of the fragile boundaries between the living and the sick. Children peek from doorways, curious yet fearful, holding small tokens, an herb sprig, a wooden charm, to ward off unseen forces. The river moves slowly, almost mournfully. Reflections of the city's walls ripple across its surface, distorted by gentle currents. You feel a strange tension. Life goes on, but it feels fragile, tentative, every breath measured against the unseen threat that has already touched the streets, the homes, and even the river itself. You take a step back, letting the cold damp bite at your fingers. A small boat drifts downstream, empty but for a few stray planks, as if the city itself is slowly releasing its hold on the living. You realize this river, once a symbol of prosperity and vitality, has become a silent witness to the slow, creeping absence that the plague has brought. You climb the hill toward the outskirts, where the wind carries a sharper chill and the landscape begins to thin. Fields once bustling with farmers are overgrown, weeds clawing at furrows that have gone unplowed. The skeletal remains of wooden fences jut from the soil, leaning at odd angles as if mourning the hands that built them. A historical fact anchors itself in your mind. Rural areas, though less densely populated than towns, were not spared. Many villages were abandoned entirely, leaving only the structures behind while life moved elsewhere or vanished. The countryside, normally full of vitality, has become a patchwork of silence. An odd, almost whimsical detail emerges. Among the tall grass, a scarecrow stands precariously, adorned in tattered wool and a faded hat, remnants of a family's attempt to maintain routine, even as the plague shadowed their homes. It rocks gently in the wind, lifeless yet oddly human, a silent witness to the exodus and fear that swept through the land. Scholars still argue whether the depopulation of rural areas caused long-term shifts in agriculture or social structure. In this moment, you only feel the emptiness pressing in, tangible and vast. A lone shepherd trudges along a path, guiding sheep that graze warily, their hooves sinking into the damp earth. He carries a staff, carved with simple runes or protective symbols, whispering soft prayers under his breath. Each sheep seems to sense the unease, huddling closer, yet the shepherd's eyes betray worry. He counts his flock as though they represent more than animals. They are fragile lifelines in a world tipping toward desolation. You notice the distant smoke from a chimney, faint against the rising sun. Someone remains, stubborn or fortunate, clinging to routine. Yet the smoke is thin, almost reluctant, like life itself is tentative here. You walk closer, catching glimpses of laundry flapping in the breeze, empty chairs on porches, and tools lying abandoned in gardens. Birds circle above, calling softly, their wings slicing through the thin air. Unconcerned by human despair, you feel a paradoxical calm, tempered with tension. The natural world continues while humanity falters, creating a dissonant rhythm that unsettles and fascinates you simultaneously. By the time you reach the crest of the hill, you look back at the town and the river beyond, a patchwork of emptiness and survival, of ritual and superstition. The landscape is quiet but alive, each detail speaking volumes about the resilience, fragility, and fear that define life in these plague-stricken lands. You follow a winding path down toward a hamlet tucked into a small valley, where the morning fog lingers like a soft shroud over thatched roofs. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, but there is an odd stillness. No children shouting, no dogs barking, only the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each step feels heavier, as if the earth itself is absorbing the absence around you. A historical fact settles into the scene. Small villages often experience the plague later than cities, but once it arrived, the mortality rate could be devastating, leaving entire families gone and homes abandoned. The quiet here is the echo of that inevitable silence. An odd detail emerges: a cart overturned by the side of the path, a wooden wool spinning slowly in the wind, its cargo long since looted or decayed. Someone has placed a tiny wooden cross next to it, a gesture of mourning or protection. The juxtaposition of desolation and delicate ritual strikes you sharply, a reminder of human attempts to impose meaning on chaos. Scholars still argue whether these symbolic acts, crosses, charms, prayers, served more as psychological relief or held any tangible protective power. You only feel the weight of their intention as you pass. A woman steps out from a doorway, holding a small basket of herbs and flowers. Her face is lined with worry, her eyes darting to the fog-shrouded fields. She murmurs to herself, whispering incantations you cannot fully hear, trying to protect what little remains. Children peer around corners, clutching dolls or bundles of bread, observing the world with a mixture of curiosity and fear. You notice a goat nibbling near a broken fence, its presence both comical and eerie amid the emptiness. Even as life continues in small forms, the human absence makes each living creature seem amplified, a focal point in the hush of despair. The distant sound of a bell chimes from a hilltop church, faint but clear, marking not just the hour but the rhythms of a world disrupted. You realize the sound is both grounding and unsettling, a reminder that time flows regardless of human suffering. As you walk further, you see a group of villagers attempting to till a patch of land. Their movement slow, careful, almost ritualistic. They work in silence, each furrow a small act of defiance against the encroaching emptiness, a claim that life persists even when mortality seems omnipresent. You enter a small chapel tucked between two leaning timbered houses. The scent of incense and candle wax lingers, thick in the still air. Wooden pews are mostly empty, save for a few weary figures kneeling with bowed heads, murmuring prayers that sound fragile against the weight of the outside world. A historical fact surfaces during plague years. Religious devotion intensified as people sought comfort, guidance, or protection from higher powers. often filling chapels despite fear of contagion. Pilgrimages and mass prayers became more frequent, though they sometimes inadvertently spread illness further. An odd detail draws your gaze. A tiny bird perched near the altar, seemingly unafraid, pecking at crumbs left by previous visitors. Its presence feels symbolic, a fragile spark of life, persisting in a space dominated by human worry and mortality. Scholars still argue whether the surge in religious activity helped communities psychologically cope or merely increased social risk. Either way, the devotion is palpable in every bowed head and whispered prayer. A priest moves slowly along the aisle, holding a brass censer swinging gently, smoke curling upward in thin, twisting lines. His eyes are tired but resolute, carrying both faith and fear as he sprinkles holy water over the sparse congregation. Some villagers clutch charms in one hand, a prayer book in the other, bridging superstition and formal worship. You notice the flickering candlelight reflecting off gilded icons, creating tiny, shimmering halos that dance on the walls. The effect is mesmerizing, almost surreal, a mixture of hope, artistry, and quiet tension. Outside, the wind rattles the chapel doors, carrying distant sounds of empty streets and the faint murmur of life continuing elsewhere. A small child peeks from behind a pew, holding a tiny wooden cross, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. You sense the way rituals, gestures, and even symbols provide comfort, fragile threads connecting the living to both faith and one another. In a world increasingly defined by absence, you step closer to the altar, noting inscriptions and carvings worn smooth by generations. Every detail seems layered with history and human persistence, a testament to those who sought light in darkness, even when the shadow of plague hovered ever near. You emerge from the chapel into a quiet garden behind the houses, dew soaking the grass and leaves shimmering with early morning light. The scent of damp earth mixes with herbs planted in neat rows, sage, rosemary, and thyme, all intended to cleanse, protect, or comfort. You step lightly, careful not to disturb. The delicate balance of life and ritual, thriving amid uncertainty. A historical fact asserts itself. Medieval households often grew medicinal and aromatic plants not only for daily use but as a defense against disease, a blend of practical and symbolic action in a time when understanding of contagion was limited. You notice how even small gardens become bastions of human effort against the creeping void of illness. An odd, almost whimsical detail appears. A small wooden scarecrow, adorned with scraps of cloth and tiny bells, rocks gently in the breeze. Its purpose part superstitious, part playful. It seems alive, a silent sentinel among herbs and flowers, guarding against misfortune with a quiet dignity. Scholars still argue whether such domestic rituals had measurable effects on health or if they're true. Power was entirely psychological. In this moment, you feel their potency in the comfort and structure they provide. A woman bends over a plot of soil, her hands steady as she sifts earth, planting seeds that may not see full growth before the season ends. Children crouch nearby, arranging tiny stones into patterns, creating miniature gardens of their own imagination. Even in play, the shadow of mortality and care for the living mingle seamlessly. You notice a cat weaving among the herbs, its movements fluid and silent. It pauses to sniff a fallen blossom before slipping behind a fence post, a small, living punctuation in the delicate choreography of human and natural life. Sunlight catches droplets of dew on a spider's web, highlighting a fragile, glimmering lattice. You pause, mesmerized by its intricate design, marveling at how beauty persists even amid desolation. Every detail, the herbs, the wooden tools, the carefully placed charms, speaks of people asserting control over the uncontrollable, shaping a world where hope can cling, however tenuously. The quiet hum of the garden, mixed with distant bells and soft footsteps, creates a rhythm that is both calming and unsettling. You sense that life here is a careful negotiation between presence and absence, resilience and fear, and each breath you take is shared with the tiny guardians of this green refuge. You continue along the cobblestone street toward the market square, now bathed in the warm light of late morning. The stalls, though still sparsely manned, begin to show signs of life. Bundles of vegetables, sacks of grain, and a few carts of salted fish waiting for customers. Yet, the energy feels tentative, like breath held too long before exhaling. A historical fact surfaces. Markets often reopened slowly after waves of plague, with traders cautiously returning to commerce while fear lingered. Scarcity and rationing shaped the goods available, and supply chains were fragile, dependent on the whims of survival and the slow return of travelers and merchants. An odd detail catches your eye. A boy sits cross-legged on a crate, carving miniature wooden swords while watching the few passing adults. His play is sharp and deliberate, a strange mimicry of the distant conflicts and fears surrounding the town. Even in leisure, the imprint of violence and vigilance is evident. Scholars still argue whether the economic disruptions from such depopulation permanently altered medieval trade networks, or if recovery was rapid once fear subsided. For now, you simply witness the fragile steps toward normalcy. A woman arranges baskets of apples with careful precision, murmuring protective charms under her breath. Each apple is polished until it gleams, a small act of hope and ritual in a world where routine is a shield against uncertainty. Children peek at the apples with longing, their hands clutching coins earned from odd chores or saved from previous days. Nearby, a man unloads barrels of ale, the scent of hops mixing with the earthy aroma of vegetables and grain. He coughs softly but persists, aware that each transaction, each smile, and each nod are subtle acts of resistance against fear and isolation. Even the pigeons perched atop the stall beams at a note of life, pecking at crumbs and cooing softly in the background. You move to the fountain at the center of the square. Its water shimmers with reflections of nearby timbered houses and distant spires, catching the light like fragments of gold. A small child leans over to watch the ripples, fascinated, almost unaware of the tension that lingers in the air. The fountain becomes a symbol of continuity, a steady presence amid disruption, a marker that life, however fragile, persists. As you take a breath and observe the square, you realize that every mundane act, arranging apples, unloading barrels, carving wood, is loaded with meaning. In a world shadowed by disease and loss, even small gestures become affirmations of life, and you feel the rhythm of the town's cautious heartbeat echoing through the cobblestones. You drift away from the market and find yourself on a quieter lane, where stone walls rise on either side and ivy curls across the rough surfaces like veins of memory. The air here feels cooler, shaded, and the noise of trade fades into the hush of everyday survival. A historical fact emerges. Medieval towns often divided into distinct quarters, with certain streets housing specific trades or families of similar background. These divisions shaped the rhythm of daily life, dictating where you found the smell of fresh bread, the clang of ironwork, or the hushed tones of clerical study. An odd detail pulls your attention: a small wooden charm nailed above a door, crudely carved into the shape of a hand with fingers splayed. Its purpose isn't entirely clear, perhaps a ward against illness, perhaps a joke, or simply the craft of a bored apprentice. But it watches you with an eerie sort of presence. Scholars still argue whether such charms were deeply believed to have protective power or if they served more as social theater, giving reassurance even when their efficacy was doubted. You pass a baker's shop, the faint smell of bread drifting through the narrow opening of the shutters. Inside, the baker stirs dough with weary hands, her movements slow but determined. A small girl peers out from the window, eyes wide, a smear of flour across her cheek as she clutches a crust of bread. The contrast between survival and routine is stark. You sense how each loaf represents both nourishment and fragile hope. Further along, an ironworker hammers at a glowing piece of metal, sparks bouncing against the stone floor before dying into darkness. His hammer's rhythm is slower than usual, his breath strained, but he continues, each strike a testament to the persistence of labor even when the future feels uncertain. Cats wind through the street, brushing against doors and curling beneath carts, silent observers of human struggle. One leaps gracefully onto a windowsill and pauses, tail flicking, its green eyes catching the fading light. The lane carries you toward a small shrine nestled into the wall, its candles flickering faintly. A figure kneels before it, whispering prayers with folded hands. Flowers, though wilted, are laid carefully in offering, their presence a symbol of care even when resources are scarce. You pause with them, allowing the stillness to wash over you. A moment of reflection framed by ivy and quiet devotion. In this muted corner of the town, you sense that survival is not measured only in grand gestures, but in the rhythm of ordinary lives, stitched together by ritual, craft, and small acts of hope etched against walls that seem timeless. You leave the healer's square and step into a narrower passage, where the air feels damp and the ground uneven beneath your feet. The walls here are darker, streaked with moss, and a faint trickle of water runs through a shallow channel at the side of the lane. The smell is sharp, half river, half waste, for this is where the drains of the town spill into hidden channels beneath the stones. A historical fact rises. Sanitation in medieval towns was rudimentary at best. Open drains, cesspits, and waste barrels often lined the streets, carrying both stench and disease. Clean water was precious, fetched from wells or fountains, while filth sometimes flowed just steps away. A detail arrests your attention. Painted on a cracked wall is a crude warning, a hand daubed in red ochre with words scrawled beneath it, half faded, "Do not foul this place." It is both a plea and a command, echoing the endless struggle to keep life livable amid the press of bodies and waste. Nearby, a boy tips a bucket into the channel, the liquid sloshing with a foul hiss as it joins the stream. He glances nervously around, as though ashamed, then darts back inside. Across the way, a woman lowers her veil against the smell, leading a child by the hand. Their pace quickens as they pass, eager to leave the foul air behind. Yet even here, small sparks of resilience remain. A washerwoman kneels beside a wooden tub, scrubbing cloth with steady, practiced strokes. The gray water splashes against her arms, but she hums softly to herself, a tune that carries an odd comfort through the sour air. The lane bends toward the sound of running water, and you glimpse a narrow bridge where, Townsfolk pause to wash their hands or fill a jug. Despite the filth, this place is necessary, a pulse of daily life that cannot be ignored. In its shadows, you feel the truth of survival, not in grand halls or markets, but in the constant negotiation between filth and cleanliness, despair and persistence. You follow the sound of rushing water until you arrive at a modest bridge of timber planks stretched across a narrow stream. The current glimmers faintly in the late light, carrying fragments of straw, leaves, and refuse downstream. Yet for all its murk, this waterway is vital, the town's artery, feeding both life and danger in equal measure. A historical fact surfaces. Medieval bridges were not only crossings, but also gathering points, often lined with stalls, shrines, or even small houses. Some became bustling marketplaces. Others stood as silent sentinels, marking boundaries of faith or commerce. A curious detail draws your eye. On one side of the bridge stands a weathered stone post carved with a cross. Coins have been wedged into its cracks, offerings left by weary travelers who hope for safe passage. The faint shimmer of metal glints in the last rays of sun, a testament to faith mingled with superstition. At the far end, an old woman leans over the rail, rinsing a bundle of herbs in the water, her hands gnarled yet steady. She mutters words under her breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a recipe for healing. Behind her, two apprentices hurry across, balancing baskets of firewood on their shoulders, their laughter breaking the solemn air. Below, the stream swirls with cats and dogs drinking greedily, untroubled by its state. A boy tosses a stone into the current, watching it vanish beneath the ripples with wide-eyed fascination, as though the river were a gateway to some hidden world. The bridge creaks beneath your step, carrying both weight and memory. You pause, gazing at the fading light mirrored in the water. Here, survival is woven from faith, labor, and the constant, balancing act between necessity and risk, an eternal dance upon the fragile planks that bind the town together. You leave the bridge behind and wander toward the outer edge of the town, where stone walls loom, weathered yet defiant. Moss clings to the cracks, and ivy trails downward like green rivers frozen in place. Beyond the walls, fields stretch into the dim horizon, their patchwork of tilled earth and wild growth blurring as dusk settles. The air here carries both freedom and unease. Freedom in the open space, unease in the vulnerability it exposes. A historical fact surfaces. Many medieval towns constructed walls not only for defense, but also as a way to regulate trade and movement. Gates became checkpoints of identity and trust, deciding who could pass, who was turned away, and who was taxed for entry. An odd sight catches your attention near the gate. A painted wooden board covered in crude drawings of faces and names, perhaps. A tally of debts, perhaps a record of wrongdoers. Or maybe just local mischief masquerading as authority. The ink is smudged, but the effect lingers. Walls, after all, do not just protect. They also judge. As you approach, a guard stands at the gate, leaning on his spear, his eyes half-lidded with fatigue. He nods briefly, not in welcome, but in acknowledgement, as though you are another thread in the endless fabric of travelers passing by. Behind him, a lantern swings gently, its glow barely holding back the coming dark. A child crouches by the base of the wall, stacking pebbles in careful piles, her small ritual unnoticed by the weary adults around her. A merchant argues with the guard over a cartload of cloth, their voices rising then falling into the hum of evening life. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, then falls silent. You linger there, at the boundary where town and wilderness meet, The sense of survival feels different here, less about daily trade or quiet ritual, more about vigilance, watchfulness, and the fragile thread of safety promised by stone walls. You trace your hand lightly against the cool stone, feeling the weight of centuries pressed into mortar. The town behind you breathes with the rhythm of survival. Ahead lies the unknown, stretching into the night. You realize that this balance, walls within, wild without, has defined human history for longer than memory. You step away from the walls and let your pace slow, feeling the cool evening air brushing against your face. The sounds of the town, the creak of gates, distant laughter, a stray dog's bark, fade gently into a soft hum, almost like a lullaby composed by the rhythm of everyday life. Shadows lengthen across the fields, and the first stars begin to twinkle, shy at first, then bold, as if nudging you toward rest. A gentle breeze stirs the grass, and you imagine it carrying whispers from centuries past, the quiet moments, the small acts of care and courage, the lives lived between stone walls and market stalls. You realize that history is not only battles, kings, or grand events. It is the cadence of ordinary lives, stitched together with ritual, labor, and hope. Each sigh of wind seems to carry one of those untold stories. Brushing softly against your senses, you find a patch of soft ground and imagine lying down. The sky overhead wide and welcoming. Crickets begin their evening chorus, and a distant owl calls once, then settles into silence. Your heartbeat slows in response, in sync with the gentle sway of branches, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the soft murmur of water far away. Even the small details of life that seemed inconsequential, an old wooden charm above a doorway, a child stacking pebbles, the shimmer of coins pressed into a shrine, take on a new significance. They are reminders of human resilience, of beauty found in the quiet, of the enduring pulse of life that flows even when history seems harsh or monotonous. You imagine the townsfolk, each in their small spaces, bakers tending bread, iron workers hammering metal, mothers watching over children, and feel the peaceful rhythm that holds everything together. The darkness does not threaten here. It envelopes gently, like a soft blanket. You allow yourself to drift alongside it, noticing how the world narrows into the comforting essentials: warmth, rhythm, presence. As your thoughts wander, your eyelids grow heavier. The whispers of history, once vivid and immediate, soften into a calm murmur, blending into the steady cadence of your own breathing. You sense the streets, the lanes, and the bridges folding quietly into memory, leaving behind only the feeling of connection between past and present, between people and place, between survival and quiet reflection. Now, as the night deepens, imagine the stars above winking gently at you, the air carrying the scent of earth and moss, the town resting in serene patience. You feel the weight of centuries lighten, and with each breath, your mind drifts further into calm. Let the rhythm of life, long ago and yet always present, lull you. Allow the stories, the soft sounds, the shadows, and the gentle wind to guide you toward rest. You are held in this quiet space, wrapped in the ordinary miracles of life, each one as soft and enduring as the night itself. Now, dim the lights completely. Let your body relax, and imagine the world softly humming around you. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a slow-moving stream, and allow yourself to sink fully into the comfort of sleep. Sleep well, and let the tales of old carry you gently through the night. End of script. Sweet dreams.